Hello and welcome back to your free Active Directory training course. In this video, I will look at what you will need hardware and software-wise to start using Active Directory. First, before you start installing Active Directory, you need to ensure the server that you are using meets the minimum hardware requirements for Active Directory. If you are running Windows Server 2008, you need a 1.4 GHz CPU for 64-bit systems. For a 32-bit system, you need a 1 GHz CPU. Active Directory requires servers called domain controllers to be deployed to authenticate users. Domain controllers generate Kerberos tickets that allow the user to access resources on the network. Kerberos tickets are mathematically time-consuming to create, so on a busy domain controller, I would suggest getting a much faster CPU. These figures that I am giving you are the minimum supplied by Microsoft, which Windows Server 2008 will work on. The minimum requirements will not give you the fastest Windows experience, so you should always try to exceed these values where possible. If you are running Windows Server 2008 R2 with or without the Service Pack 1 on a 64-bit system, you need to be running, once again, a 1.4 GHz CPU. If you are running a dual-core 64-bit CPU, Microsoft has dropped the requirement to a 1.3 GHz CPU. Windows Server 2008 R2 does not support 32-bit CPUs, so you will need to run Windows Server 2008 if you have a 32-bit CPU. For RAM, Microsoft recommends a minimum of 512 megabytes of RAM. In a testing environment, we run Active Directory domain controllers with 512 megabytes of RAM, and they run okay. These servers have little to no load. I would personally recommend at least 1 gigabyte in a production network for a Windows Server 2008 domain controller. On a busy network, I would recommend 2 gigabytes, but generally speaking, the more RAM, the better. For hard disk space, Windows Server 2008 requires a minimum of 32 gigabytes for 32-bit or 64 gigabytes for a 64-bit system. In reality, these are the minimum requirements given by Microsoft, so when installing Active Directory, I would go at least 100 gigabytes. This gives plenty of room to grow. Nowadays, hard disk space is quite cheap, so allocate a decent amount of disk space when possible. The last requirement is that you need to be running Enterprise, Data Center, Standard, Foundation, or the HPC edition of Windows Server 2008. Active Directory domain services cannot be installed on the Itanium or Web editions of Windows Server 2008 or Windows Server 2008 R2. One last point I would like to mention is if you are upgrading to Windows Server 2008. If this is the case, you cannot upgrade from Windows Server 2000 to Windows Server 2008. You also need to be running at least Windows Server 2003 with Service Pack 2. Lastly, upgrades between different architectures are not supported. That is, you cannot upgrade from a 32-bit operating system to a 64-bit operating system. Where possible, I advise you to perform a clean install of Windows Server 2008 when deploying an Active Directory domain controller. Although it is possible to upgrade an existing domain controller running Windows Server 2003 to Windows Server 2008, you do risk taking any problems with that domain controller with you. However, having said that, Microsoft does support upgrades, and sometimes the business need will require you to upgrade an existing server as spare hardware may not be available. Once you have your hardware and software ready, there is one last point to take into consideration, and that is DNS. DNS, or Domain Name System, is a system that allows computers to locate resources on the network. The reason it is important is that Active Directory cannot function without it. When you deploy Active Directory, you can use an existing Microsoft DNS infrastructure or install Microsoft DNS with the Active Directory install. If you are using another DNS solution in your company, for example Unix DNS, this can also be used. The important thing to consider is that you need DNS on the network for Active Directory to operate. DNS is fundamental to Active Directory. Later in this course, I will go into a lot of detail about DNS and how it works with Active Directory. When you install Active Directory, the wizard will give you the choice to install Microsoft DNS with the Active Directory install. Even though DNS is so important, you can accept the defaults and Microsoft will do all the hard work for you. This is why I don't cover DNS until later in the course. In the next video, I will install Active Directory now that all the theory is out of the way. I hope you've enjoyed this free video. For more free videos in this series and other free courses, please see our webpage or YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.